Parthika, your SASA host for today, and I am honored to be joined by Dr. Irina Maria Mane, who will be sharing her insights on this interesting topic. A bit of housekeeping before we get started. So, firstly, what is SASA? SASA stands for Save Ancient Studies Alliance. Our mission is to promote the study of the ancient world and engagement with our human deeper past. Building a grassroots movement through outreach, collaboration, accessibility, and public scholarship, we work towards our goal of inspiring a wide, inclusive community of scholars, learners, and students. You can find us on all major media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, TikTok, and LinkedIn by searching Save Ancient Studies. Please be kindful and respectful. Listen and ask thoughtful questions throughout the event. Please be patient with technology and those administering it. SASA Live events are live streamed on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. SASA Live events are recorded and archived. Recordings will be posted on the above platforms shortly after the event. And most importantly, have fun. If you enjoy our live events such as RQ Gaming, book clubs, reading groups, please consider becoming a supporter of SASA with a recurring monthly donation. For as little as $3 a month, you can help us to save ancient studies. Go to saveancientstudies.org/donate to learn more. Thank you for joining us again. Now I'll hand it over to Irina.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. As always, a pleasure to be here. Now, I'm just hoping to go through these slides smoothly without technical difficulties, because it's very important for us to look at the inscriptions I have prepared for today. Yeah, so the topic is runic magic, the real one, and by real one, I mean here this historical one. This is a topic which has been an extremely sensitive one throughout the past, let's say, 200, particularly the past 100 years, because it has been overused and misused, misappropriated in all kinds of forms, in especially with regard to the political misappropriations. So that's why I think it is important to have a discussion about it. Disclaimer: runic inscription are studied by the discipline known as runology. That is a very serious academic discipline, and it forms part of historical linguistics. So I myself, I'm actually a historian, not a linguist, but I do need these inscriptions because I'm dealing with the Viking Age, and they are among the very few inscriptions actually stemming from the time period and space I am studying. So it's also very important for me. So what we'll be discussing today, I am going to show you a couple of inscriptions dealing with enabling magic and healing magic from not only from the time of the Vikings, but also from earlier on, from the so-called Merovingian period, otherwise known as the migration period. And I will also show you a couple of medieval ones so that we can see that we are dealing actually with a very broad time span here. So, like I said before, there has been a great deal of misconceptions about this particular topic, and most information you are going to find on the internet today is to be taken with a great deal of caution, because generally speaking, you're going to find a lot of people claiming that they can perform runic divination, although we have no idea how that was performed, as a matter of fact. And you're also going to find a lot of lists with runes and a couple of concepts or symbols associated to them, which again it is extremely problematic due to the lack of sources. So when we say runes, we actually mean a couple of things, because there have been multiple alphabetic systems known as the Futharks. First of all, we are dealing with the Elder Futhark. This is, let's say, the more general Germanic alphabet used to transcribe a lot of Germanic languages, from Gothic Old High German to Proto-Norse and several Germanic dialects, and it has been in use till about 800 with a transitional period, and this transitional period leads us to the Younger Futhark. This is the actual Viking alphabet, if you want to call it like that, so the alphabet used in the Viking Age, but also beyond the Viking Age, so from 800 to about 1200 AD. Otherwise, we also have the Anglo-Saxon or Anglo-Frisian Futhark, as well as medieval runes, which have taken inspiration from from the older runes, but with a couple of changes, such as more bind runes and decorative symbols, and so on and so forth. So among the first objects, I say among the first objects because you never know what is going to be discovered in the meantime. We have the Vimosecome. This is apparently so far the oldest inscription we know in the Elder Futhark. It is dated back to about 160, and it carries an inscription with the term Harja, which most likely has some kind of militaristic meaning in the sense of warrior. Uh, Such terms are found actually on multiple inscriptions from later periods as well. And it is an exciting field because in the past months, for example, we have at least two vital discoveries. First of all, being the one in Denmark. We have a bracteate, so a small coin-like pendant, where we have the name of the god Odin for the first time. And the inscription states something like "I belong to Odin" or something of the sort. And then we also have what we now deem as the oldest runestone that was discovered in Norway, and it dates back to about 200 AD. So whenever we discuss about dating, we also need to take into account that discoveries are made in the passage of time, and we have to adapt to them. So the runes are also grouped in series called the Ætir, as you can see here, both in the Elder Futhark and more visible in the Younger Futhark. I also need to mention that in terms of deciphering the inscriptions, the Elder Futhark is actually a little easier, and that is because it has more letters. It has 24 letters, and they're more or less identical, or at least similar to the Latin alphabet. The Younger Futhark has been simplified, severely simplified. We're only left with 16 letters, and the problem is that one letter can be used to represent more sounds, which creates a little bit of a problem. So you also need knowledge of historical linguistics in order to decipher the inscriptions. But then again, that's also something extremely fascinating, at least to my mind. They also have names, actually reconstructed names. We have a couple of sources called the Runic poems, the Anglo-Saxon Runic poem, the Norwegian Runic poem, and the Icelandic Runic poem, which is the most complete one, but unfortunately it is of later date. It dates back to the 15th century, and based on the names for these runes inscribed in these poems, and by the way, they tend to have had a mnemonic function, simply due to the fact that people might have forgotten what they were actually called. So in the 15th century, probably they would have. So these poems were used to remember the ancient times and ancient law and so on, and also draw a connection to the past. But anyway, based on these poems, the oldest of them being the Anglo-Saxon one, as a matter of fact, based on them, we could reconstruct the Proto-Germanic terms used to designate these runes. And as you can see, so you have every rune standing for a concept as well. So, for example, the first rune, Fehu, stands for cattle or wealth. This is, however, not to say that if, for example, I wrote the rune F on some stone or some stick, that automatically meant that I was invoking wealth to come to me. It didn't really work like that. So runes were first and foremost an alphabetic system, but they do sometimes occur in magical inscriptions, as we shall see, but not in the sense that the runes themselves possess some magical powers, but rather the way you use them and mix them up, combine them, that would have also had some kind of symbolic meaning and also magical meaning, incantation, enabling spells, as well as healing spells, fertility charms, even love spells, and so on and so forth. With regard to rune stones, this is also a very interesting topic. I just wanted to say this is not the topic for today, but we're going to be dealing with them anyway when discussing runes. So most rune stones, which actually stem from the Viking Age, not earlier, these are rather the exceptions. What you can see here, the Berketorp, Stentoften, and Rök runestone, they're from the transitional period, more or less. Most runestones do seem to have a commemorative function, so it's essentially a member of the kin erecting this monument in honor of another member of the kin who probably died somewhere, or anyway, very generally as a form of honoring them. They're also used to set disputes with regard to inheritance and property, and they can also be used when you erect, for example, an important administrative um, building, or some kind of important landmark, such as a bridge. If you did that, you wanted to show to everyone else that you were this important member of the elite, and you had the opportunity and the power to erect such a monument. So these are monuments that would have stood out in the middle of the landscape. They would have been very visible, so in this way you would have shown the entire community how important you were, essentially. So it's kind of like the equivalent of a funerary stone, because most of them actually date to the period of conversion or Christianization, so not earlier. However, you do have some very interesting exceptions to this rule. For example, on the Björketop runestone, you're going to find the carver who designates himself as the master of runes, and he says that he concealed here the runes of power, and may the one who breaks the monument be doomed to insidious death and plagued by effeminacy, which was a pretty serious curse to cast upon someone at the time. Also, an interesting example we have here in the Stentoft runestone. Here you have again a master of the rune, and it's also very cryptical because it mentions some dwellers and some guests to whom a guy named Hadulfar gave full year, and it is also stated that Hariulvar concealed here 9 stallions, 9 bucks, and the runes of power, and again the classical curse, may the one who breaks the monument be doomed. So this is most likely in relation to some kind of ritual, some kind of offering due to the animals mentioned here, as well as to the harvest, which we have on the runestone. And probably one of the most complex runestones, both from the Merovingian and from the Viking Age, is the Rök runestone. It is extremely cryptic. A lot of interpretations, or several interpretations, have been proposed. It seems lately that the idea of it containing riddles with reference to some mythological content from the time of the migration seems to be the most likely interpretation here. So it starts like in the usual way with the runestone being erected in memory of someone called Vormodr, and then it is stated who colored, who carved the runes, and that the father erected this monument in the memory of his dead son. But the problems arrive afterwards, because then some kind of folk tale is told here, with 2 war booties, 12 times taken as war booty together with various men, and then a series of riddles regarding some probably Gothic lost mythological content, which they're, like I said, very difficult to decipher. But these are narrative runestones, so you basically tell a story, not necessarily something magical is being invoked here. and that is why I'm going to move on. Speaking of magic, yes, you can use rune in an alphabetic way. This is the most common way to use them. So you basically write spells with the runes as a means of communication, and as a means of communication, you can write both profane and magical or religious things. But then you have the more seldom use of them ideographically. The term in German scholarship for that is Begriffsrunen, Begriff meaning concept. So essentially, with the rune, um, designating a concept. But I repeat, this is not really a common usage. So in the previous inscription from the Stentorf runestone, we do have an example for this. So when it is stated that Ulfar gave full year, the rune is not really the rune signifying harvest or good year, because year usually meant good harvest. It is not the word. It is not written in fully. It is just the rune written on the rune stone. So in this sense, yeah, you could use a rune to symbolize a concept, but then again, that's not really frequently done. Also, you have the mother rune from the Viking Age, meaning man or person more generally. That is also pretty common to use ideographically. But then again, most runes are just used in writing, so to write all kinds of charms and spells. And speaking of which, we can group them in according to their functions. So you can have a function of just invoking the gods to a certain purpose. You can have a function of enabling an object to gain power, or you can have a function of healing someone from a disease, as we shall see later on, as well as other types of functions such as fertility charms or even love spells. With regard to the usage of the runes, we have a couple of clues. There has been a lot of debate regarding the divination function of the runes. I must say we don't really know that much about it. We do have a reference in the Germania written by Tacitus, but that is really an old reference, and we don't know how much it extended over the following 1,000 years. So in Germania, in chapter 10, he does mention the divination using what he calls notai. Yeah, it's maybe a proto form of runes or something like that, carved on sticks, but we don't really have any details about how this was actually done. We do have references with regard to the importance of the runes and their magical nature in later texts. By magical nature, I rather mean here the idea that they were extremely important to convey a message. We have the Runatal, for example, that is a part of the poem Hovamol in the Poetic Edda, where we have the idea of Odin, god Odin, sacrificing himself to himself in order to gain knowledge of the runes. So it would have definitely been a very important thing to be able to write at the time. And at least at the beginning, only the elites would have been able to do so. So, of course, they would have also gained this connotation of being something kind of fantastic and supernatural. And then again, we have the Sigurdrifamål, which is also a poem from the Poetic Edda, written in the 1200s. And here again, we have a little more complex retelling of the usages of the runes, but then again, in a very cryptic manner. This is about a Valkyria called Sigurdrifa, Brynhildr in the Volsunga saga, who essentially teaches the hero Sigurd how to use runes. And she uses a lot of terms to designate them. For example, victory runes or protection runes, even ale runes, all runar, very interestingly. But we're not really sure about what exactly these runes meant. So from the context and from the general context of the corpus of the runes, we can dwell on this idea that they would have been regarded as a very powerful means of communication, and thus they would have had this function to fill someone or something with magical powers by inscribing runes, to inscribing a message written in runes, either on stone or on either kind of object. Then again, we also have later references in some sagas. For example, in the saga of Egil, there is a very interesting episode where the hero Egil Skallagrimsson, he erects what is known as a nithstang, which is a pillar of infamy, essentially. It is directed to Eric Bloodaxe, with whom he has a feud, with his wife, with his queen Gunhild as well. And he erects this pole with the head of with the head of a dead horse on it, and he also scribbles the pole with all kinds of runes, and he says that these runes are going to attract a curse upon the king. And you also have a couple of references in the legendary saga of Bossi and Herauth, as well as some references about using runes in order to cause evil to someone in the saga of Grettir, but no further details are added here. So the exact runes that are used or the message sent, that's not something we know a lot about, unfortunately. So if you see on the internet lists like this one here with Viking rune meanings, please be very, very cautious, because there is a lot of mixing up of concepts which have nothing to do with one another. Also concepts that are not to be found, not even in the rune poems where we actually find the name of the runes. And the runes of the elder Futhark also tend to be mixed up with the runes of the younger Futhark. And again, about divination, yeah, sure, you can try to do that, but remember that whatever you do, it's based on a very, very modern interpretation, inspired by all kinds of movements in the neo-heathen, neo-pagan scene, new age scene, and so on and so forth. And it has very little historical relevance. Okay, so speaking of historical relevance, let's look at a couple of inscriptions. So the most obvious way of calling on the divine to fill an object with magical powers would have been to just inscribe a message requesting the gods to do so. And this you can see on this buckle on this part of a saddle strap found at the site known as Vimose, which literally means the holy bog. This would be in Denmark, and the meaning here is end ring to the Ors I dedicate. Ors being the singular of Asir, the main group of gods. It's a very old inscription from the 3rd century. There has been some controversy in the past concerning the reading of the inscription. This is something that happens all the time because of the double A rune spelling, a strategy which might have been used to highlight a word, much like we do with capital letters today. It does seem to be similar to a line of poetry, and both religious and magical sayings are often used like that in a metrical form. And we can also assume that they would have also been sung, not only spoken. So here you have just a way to invoke the divine for help, and the end ring could have been very well a logical metaphor, a way of describing a buckle, probably a poetic one. Examples of the kind abound. Sometimes we have the luck of finding inscriptions with the very names of a couple of gods that would have been common at the time. We have the Nordendorf fibula, for example, the safety pin from the 6th century. And these safety pin brooches were quite common in the early medieval times, and favored by most Germanic peoples, regardless of the gender. And here we have 3 names. We have Logathore, Wodan, and Wigi Thonar. So it's very interesting because, of course, we can identify here the older continental Germanic name of Odin, so Wodan, and we also can find Thor here. Thor bringing the victory, victory bringer, if you want. And the problem here would be with Logathore. This is a little difficult to interpret, but this would seem to be the old Germanic counterpart of Lodur. This is a figure quoted a couple of times as a friend of Odin by an Icelandic skald accompanying Odin in a scene in the Norse mythological poem the Völuspá, the Sirius's prophecy, where you have a triad of deities. This would have been a common theme at the time as well, and Logathora, which would have meant a trickster or a sorcerer, would have made sense for Loki to be called like that as well. And with regard to the second part, to the last line of the inscription, this is a little difficult to interpret. It seems to have to do with the two names here. Awa seems to be a woman's pet name, and Leuvini, it would mean something like love friend. So what exactly is meant here is a little bit cryptic. However, we can assume that it would have been an attempt to maybe wish a couple good luck. I'm thinking it could have been this. Right. Yeah. Okay. Here we have an inscription found near Værløse, so in Denmark, with something which is really, really common to see in this inscription, in these inscriptions, which is the term alu in combination with all kinds of words, usually designated divine beings, such as we have here, Alugoth. Right. So you can find this kind of dedication when you want to ask for luck from a particular deity. So you're going to find in other sources, for example, on the Fortson buckle, be lucky Alawin, be lucky Alawin, and Alawith. So a reference to some mythological beings, and the use of the prefix al, which is great or whole. And you were going to find this prefix quite often also in the names, for example, of Germanic mother goddesses attested in the Rhineland in Roman times, who do have epithets of similar forms, as well as in the better known epithet of Odin as the Alfather. So I would call him the great father, although the second term father is also a bit controversial regarding what it could have meant. You can see here that this is used in the vocative case. It was found in the grave of a woman who died in her early 30s or 20s, and it is also followed by a swastika. The swastika was a divine symbol in both Germanic and Celtic tradition, generally speaking, in Central Europe, in the Bronze Age and in the Iron Age. And as you know, unfortunately, it was ruined by National Socialism, but you're going to find it very often on a lot of objects this period. It's a solar symbol. It's a solar symbol of Indo-European origin, as a matter of fact, and it is one of the most common symbols you're ever going to find. So, like I said, this is a very common inscription. The great god. So the great god would have made this brooch appear blessed or lucky. In Setra in Norway, we have the example of a rune inscribed kiln, which has been found along some other items, and the goods date to the 6th, 7th century AD. And here we have a reading with Hail, maid of maids, dedication to Nana, dedication to Nana. Contextually speaking, I think the term dedication as a translation for Alu would seem, at least now, the most appropriate. This inscription, the transcription given here, is the most commonly accepted one. And Nana is also the name of a goddess that appears in later sources, the wife of the god Balder, and it seems to be part of a prayer, perhaps, and the expression made of maids is also known from the later Norse sources. Mm, the term alo employed here appears quite commonly in early runic amulet legends and belongs to a special category of words that are very, very typical for this kind of Germanic amulet, but which only rarely appear as part of full sentences. Functionally, they seem to have been the Germanic counterparts of the voces magicae of Gnostic amulets, but unlike the charm words of the classical tradition, they are not divine or sacred names. More recently, alu has been shown to appear in North Etruscan votive use, where the term clearly means dedication. So, given the fact that the latest theories regarding the origins of the runes tend to place them somewhere at the confluence of the Germanic space and the Celtic space, and they would have probably been influenced by Alpine alphabets such as Lepontic. So in Cisalpine Gaul, this interpretation is actually an acceptable one. The fact that they would have had all these contacts with other populations in the area, and they would have adopted some vital markers of communication and signifiers. So these were short ones, and we also have longer ones, and this is probably one of the most interesting objects you're going to find that has runes inscribed on it. This is a human skull, a part of a human skull found at Ribe, which was a very important Viking settlement in Denmark, and it is generally assumed that the skull piece taken from the top of the cranium was not that of a recently killed victim decapitated for that purpose, but rather it had been exposed for some times before the runes were engraved on it. It also doesn't seem to have anything to do with the practice of trepanation. The text is a transitional inscription which predates the Viking period, so 8th century, let's say at the border of the Viking Age, and probably executed around the 725. It has a mixture of runes stemming from both the elder and the younger Futhark, and it reads that Ulv and Odin and High Tyr is help for Bur against these pain and stroke of a dwarf Bur carved. So this is a healing spell. This seems to be a healing spell, at least. We have a triad of gods, although we're not really sure what is meant by Ulve here, which literally means wolf. But anyway, Odin does have a connotation of healer. This is something you're going to find, for example, in the sayings of the High One, so in the Hovamol, in the Poetic Edda, where it is said that he does know spells which the sons of men need. And the role of the dwarf as an agent of disease is also well attested in the Germanic folklore, although we don't really have a clear idea of what this stroke was, against which this inscription was supposedly meant to ward. So Ulva may be a poetic reference to another divinity, or perhaps even to Odin himself, because Odin is also connected to wolves. He has two wolves, Geri and Freki, living at his court. And the second name, High Tyr, might also have two meanings. It either means Tyr, like the warrior god from Old Norse mythology, but the earlier meaning was actually a god in general, because Tyr is actually cognate with Deus from Latin. So it's not really certain what it was meant here. Compare for this Sigtyr, which means victory god, or Fimbultyr, the mighty god. It's really a very, very common term you're going to find everywhere in Old Norse poetry. Okay. Then we have another inscription, this time referring to the exploits to the most popular Norse god, which is Thor, found on a small copper plate from Kvinneby on the Swedish island of Öland. It's from the 11th century. It is just a square measuring around 5 square centimeters, covered with several lines of runic texts winding backward and forward, along with a rough outline of a fish. Um, and the inscription actually does refer to a myth featuring Thor, which suggests that we are dealing with a narrative charm. So it goes like this: I carve for you, help Bovi, help me. Knowledge or something of the sort. Ihud, this is a term we really don't know what it is, but from the context, maybe knowledge is certain for you. And may the lightning hold all evil away from Bovi. May Thor protect him with that hammer which came out from the sea. Flee from evil, it will get nothing from Bovi, and the gods are under him and over him. So, more or less, this would be the inscription. As you can see, we are dealing with a poetic text. We are also dealing with common features of poetic texts, such as alliteration and assonance. Although we don't really have a standard Norse meter, there seems to be some allusion to the tale of Thor's fishing expedition. This is related in the poem from the Poetic Edda known as the poem of Hymir, where Thor sailed out with the giant to fish the monstrous Midgardsormr, using the head of an ox as a bait. And when he finally managed to hook the evil serpent, he was struck at his head with his hammer, and it sank back into the sea. We also have an alternate version of this in Snorri's Prose Edda. So what seems to be going on here is that the carver of the amulet is definitely appealing to god Thor for protection, for security, presumably at sea from the overall context, because at sea a sudden storm would have been a great danger, and without some protective deity hovering above you, you would have had lesser chances to survive. And several spells against drowning are also known from Scandinavian spell books from a much later date. And magical runes to ensure safety at sea are also mentioned in the poem I had before, the Sigurdrivu Mol. So, yeah, Thunder God Thor, very popular during the Viking Age, and it is worth remembering that he is also the pagan god invoked on rune stones from Scandinavia. No other god is invoked on rune stones from Scandinavia. So, this is also worth remembering. Um, we also have later references. We have later references, for example, from this stick found in Bergen in the 12th century. Here we have a reference to the two main Norse gods, to Thor and Odin. This is found this was found in the 12th century, so in 1185, dated back to 1185, and actually a lot of similar objects were found in Bergen, but most inscriptions seems to be very profane. They don't have anything ritualistic or magical around them. However, sometimes we do find an invocation of pagan deities, which may come as a surprise because the date is very late for such a thing. However, we must also remember that despite the conversion of Norway to Christianity, essentially achieved by the two Olafs, Olaf Tryggvason and Saint Olaf, we also find a great mix of pagan and Christian elements up until a later date. The stick, however, may have no supernatural function at all, but simply represent the recording of a literary tradition. This is also something we need to take into account, that these objects don't necessarily always represent a blessing. Sometimes they're just poetic texts written on all kinds of objects. Either way, the reference is very interesting because it essentially says, "Hail to you, and may you be in good spirits. May Thor receive you, and may Odin own you." This is interesting because this expression, Odin, may Odin own you. So this idea of Odin having ownership on you. This is something you're also going to find in a couple of sagas. The ownership of his fallen warriors of the Einherjar is referred here most probably, and this is made very clearly in a prose tale of Styrbjorn in the Icelandic collection known as the Flateyjar book. And this tale records that in a battle in the middle of the 10th century, the Swedish king Eirikr, after sacrificing to Odin, cast a stick over the opposing army while making a battle cry. And this battle cry was precisely this: Odin owns all of you. So you're going to be sacrificed to Odin. So, from this point of view, perhaps this inscription can be interpreted as a funerary charm, appealing to the gods to receive the corpse. Although the opening line of wishing good health, good spirits, doesn't seem to be in harmony with the former idea. It may also represent a pagan greeting because similar formulae can be found in some old Germanic texts, including a reference in the poem of Hymir, where it is also said, "Hail to you, Hymir, in such good spirits." But then again, it may be a combination of the two of them. So these were a couple of examples where you can find the names of the gods asking to do something in particular. And then we have a very large category of spells known as enabling spells. So these are essentially spells that are written in runes on particular objects in order to make them more powerful. And we have this reference again in Sigurdrifumal, again with the formulae Sigrunar or Valrunar, like the battle runes, mentioned several times, not only in this poem, but also in some Old English literary sources. Although, I repeat, we're not very sure what they were or which runes were exactly meant here, or whether the whole alphabet was meant here. My suspicion would be that the whole alphabet was meant here. In the old English poem Solomon and Satan, for example, we are told that bookstaves bewitch the blade in sword fame. So if you inscribed some runes on your sword, you would have probably made it more powerful. At some point in the Eddic poem for Skirnis or Skirnis' journey, a sword is described as being adorned with counsel, and this could have also meant the idea of writing something on it. For example, we have this short sword found over a century ago in the River Thames, and it is now in the British Museum. And the inscription, so in the inscription you can see here actually the alphabet, so simply the alphabet written down, which would have been also meaningful as a potential charm. And you can also find a name here. So the name, actually, Begnoth, is the only part of the text that is in linguistically meaningful. And as in other charms and amatory finds, the runic equivalent to an ABC, so an alphabet, can have a magical function and an effect on the blade. Otherwise, it wouldn't appear on so many objects. So simply writing the alphabet on an object would have endowed it with powers. Right. Another example of a similar text was found in a place called Lindholm in Denmark in the 5th century, dating back to the 5th century. It is a piece of bone which was worked more or less into this crescent shape fish perhaps or serpent, and it is definitely an amulet, and it reads, I am called the sun, or I am the carver, I the carver am called the sun. Erilas, this is something which would seem to mean earl, like a lord of some kind, but then again, it could also be something more general, a more general designation for the one carving the runes, um, actually stating his power in carving these runes. And then you can see something which is, yeah, not really intelligible, with the alu at the end, again the dedication. So we can speculate that this was probably also a lucky charm, or perhaps it had something to do with fishing or sailing, giving the shape of the object. In a small village in Hungary called Besenia, we also have some interesting finds here. A couple of runic inscriptions, probably of Lombard manufacture, because the Lombards were still living on the Pannonian plains at the time, so in the 6th century. So on these long silver bow brooches, you are just going to find a couple of names, laconic texts, so amulets, wishing their owners, both women, Lombard women, joy and blessing. So we do have some kind of formula here, if you will, a name plus a special or a magical word, and by using this, yeah, you could actually empower that object to allow you to bestow upon you the qualities or the blessings you desired. Such texts seem to be paralleled by further ones. This time, two of the basic elements seem to have been linked and expanded into a more eloquent manner. It's also a longer inscription, and it seems to have to do something with protection as well. It mentions protection on a wood plane, that is a wooden weapon sharpener that was again found in Vimosa. It's a very rich place, archaeologically speaking, dating very early, back to the 3rd century, so about 200. The runes, unfortunately, are not really that legible, but it has been transcribed as something like spearman, you may want offerings, I counsel protection. So, despite the difficulty of interpretation, it is reminiscent of a narrative charm as well, possibly a designation for the owner of the wood plane. Um, we probably have his nickname written here, although that's not really that certain what this first word was. But at any rate, it may be that the plane is suggesting, I am giving you protection. So I am now an object of power, and I am giving you, the owner, protection or counsel. Similar objects have been found, similar inscriptions have also been found on a couple of spear shafts, dating again back to the 5th century, so the migration period. They're old inscriptions, and this is, for example, the Karhul spear shaft. It was excavated in the 19th century, and it is carved with runes, decorated much as those on other amulets I showed you. So again, we can see this formula of Erilas, so either Earl Mua, perhaps like the title mentioned, or like I said before, maybe it is just a designation of the one who carved the stone, the runes, acknowledging the fact that he had the power to do that. And it is a very poetic inscription, because it states that I cry a roar, I invoke hail in the spear, which actually makes a lot of sense, because you would have wanted your weapon to be powerful, to be as powerful as to liberate a roar, as well as to cause hail on the enemy. So it's a very poetic expression on an item, and this is a typical charm function words, much as it was found in Vimose and probably also in other places such as the Spindelwald and Ström and other Germanic spearheads. Speaking of spearheads, some of them also have names. So we have here two examples, one from Darmstorff and the other from Kowal. There are also some from Illerup, again in Denmark. So we have here names such as the router or the potentially target rider, although again, sometimes the interpretation is a little bit speculative. But what we need to remember from this is that this is something you would have done in order to empower your objects. Just write the name of your spear, and then perhaps also decorate it with a couple of a couple of combinations of symbols. Yeah, another example here from Nudem in the fifth, and it seems to be interpretable linguistically. But if we take into account what we discussed earlier about how letter sequences in themselves can function as magical symbols, we can assume that somehow this would have also had the power to enchant the spear some way. So there have been some interesting studies about the way these inscriptions are organized, and I am going to point out a very important book on the matter. The book is called Runic Amulets and Magical Objects, or the other way around, Magical Objects. Anyway, you're going to find it in the description at the end. At any rate, the book written by MacLeod and Mies in 2006 um, has an interesting summary regarding the composition of these expressions, and the older formulae seem to have been reduced to a couple of essential characteristics. So first of all, we have letter sequences. That means we have the Elder Futhark rows, or apparently some kind of encoded assortment of runes. Then we would have some naming inscriptions, expressions such as a single name, but also more complex ones, such as I am called this and that, and I say my name and I say what I've done. Then we have terms called the formula or charm words. These include the alu we discussed earlier. We can also have symbols such as tree-like shaped, tree-like. They look like these three tier runes pushed together, the tree symbol. Then we also have Triskelia and swastika and the tamgas. These are those decorations I showed you on the spear shafts. So it's of course not necessary to have all these 5 characteristics in these inscriptions, but you will have a minimum of 2 on either inscription you find, at least from the Merovingian, from the time of the migration. So check out this book, Runic Amulets and Magical Objects, because it has a lot of supplementary information, and I also used it in order to prepare the presentation for today. It's really an extraordinary work. Yeah, so for example, the Lindholm amulet I showed you earlier can be analyzed as a naming expression plus a letter sequence plus a charm word, and the Nidam Shaft text is a letter sequence plus a symbol. Some are much more difficult to retrieve because they seem to be pretty much encoded, such as this sword retrieved from the Thames also. It dates back to the 8th century, and it looks really odd, and at first glance, the only thing that seems clear about this description is that we have a runic ABC there, but at the same time, it is flanked by two E letters, as you can see. In fact, we do seem to have a name here, which is scrambled. This is the name Setbert, and the text is analytically the same as the one on the other objects from the Thames River on the blade, but much more cunningly coded. So this was also something you could have done. Perhaps it also had a meaning if you scrambled the words. Perhaps it meant that you endowed it with even more magical power. But that is only speculative. Maybe, yeah, maybe the carver just did it for fun, and we're overinterpreting it now. All right, the most common and varied of all runic similar texts, however, here on the objects known as bracteates. So bracteates, they're these golden medallion-like pendants. They're very thin and they look like a coin, and you could have worn it like a pendant. And you can also find them in a lot of graves, and also in a lot of depositions. Sometimes they are intentionally destroyed, probably with ritualistic connotation. You could have also worn them hung from the belt, so not necessarily around your neck, and they were extremely popular during the migration period. Most of them date back to the period between 300 and 600, and examples have been found in Central Europe, in Scandinavia, in England, and in the Low Countries. The runic texts were employed as replacements for legends typically found on large Roman coins. And we must also mention here that the images depicted don't necessarily have anything to do with the inscription. Sometimes the pictures would suggest mythological scenes. We have examples of pendants where we have a man, for example, being bitten by a wolf, just like the mythological Tyr, who lost his hand while trying to tame the wolf Fenrir in Old Norse mythology. But then again, it's very difficult to draw this connection because we are dealing with very different time periods. Of course, some of these mythological motifs would have survived also later on in the Viking Age, but it is also very, very difficult to extrapolate something that you can find in a literary source in the 1200s to an image you find in the migration period. There would have definitely been some common elements that had survived, but other than that, we also need to take into account that this mythology would have probably been much more varied than the literary texts allow us to know. Many of the pendant legends are five-part amulet texts, speaking of the five categories described before. Some otherwise, some are not really that intelligible. On many of them, you can again find all kinds of letters which apparently don't really mean anything, but the sequence of letters. For example, they tend to use or overuse the letters A, L, and U in order to suggest this magical potency. Or you can also have common words used on all kinds of inscriptions, perhaps also in relation to fertility and power, such as the word lauk, which means leak. Offerings. Yeah, when you think of bracteates, you can generally think of offerings such as suggested, like it is as it is suggested here in the Vadstena bracteate. So this is one of the famous ones. It was discovered in Sweden in the late 18th century, and it probably has to do something with offering, because the first word means exactly this, and then you again have a sequence of the Futhark row separated in its traditional three families, and two repeated charm words, which supposedly come from the Germanic verb taujan, which means to offer or to make, and this is used in dedicatory inscriptions. So the etymology would seem to fit here. Much as with the Vadstena pendant, many runic amulets have charm words on them that appear to be somehow ritualistic in origin, and they seem to be simplified as well. So, for example, in these three examples I have here, you have a name first, and then you have one of these words which seem to be very common at the time. So, Ladu seems to be an invocation as well. So Ladu, Alu, and Lauk, very common words to be found on these inscriptions. Here I offered some from Denmark, again from Tahum and Skåne. Yeah, so in this inscription, for example, from southern Sweden, from Skåne, you can find uh, not only find alu on it, you find four words meaning yeah, essentially the same thing, an invocation of some kind. Very interestingly, the third lakas, which means kill, and it is an imitative word, and it is also connected with a word for the cuckoo, derived from the noise that the bird makes. And in this particular context, I would say that it possibly refers to some kind of battle cry, perhaps. So in this sense of a battle roar, if you will. And the other three words, yeah, they probably have to do with fertility and some kind of dedication, making the amulet a powerful warrior charm. Or the Ølst pendant again in Denmark, hail dedication. The pendant also has two swastikas on it, so the solar system, but it's not really clear if either was supposed to complement the runic legend. The term Hagala is very interesting because it was also used in the Kragerhol spear shaft, as we've seen before, in order to invoke hail in the spear. So it would seem logical for us to assume that this would have been used in some kind of metaphorical sense, because hail is a very powerful meteorological phenomenon, and it would have been an attempt again to signify power. Yeah, another interesting example, an assortment of charm words with suggestive military aspects, was found at Antley in Suffolk, and it has parallels to the other texts I presented to you. And it reads, yeah, something like raw and strong and reward. So this does seem to have a militaristic connotation. It seems to indicate that this amulet somehow was referring to the military sphere, supposedly to make the wearer a very strong and successful warrior. And we also have other examples that range from just writing a word on them to adding some uninterpretable letter sequences and all kinds of names, and sometimes very perplexing sequences. But the clear favorite charm words, so to speak, are Aloladu and Laukas. So dedication, invocation, and let's say fertility, symbolized by the leek. Yeah, these ones here are very, very bizarre looking and perplexing, but they also seem to encompass the word erilas, we talked about before, known from other Scandinavian runic texts. It also has some decorative or decorated runes there, and again the swastikas, and it's usually regarded as an example of coding, presumably understood as indicating an amuletic naming expression. So erilas and the other sequences seem to be some kind of um, yeah, coded rows with no particular meaning. if we go through the corpus, we're going to definitely find more examples. We have an example from the island of Funen with a man's name and two charm words, as well as a letter sequence, which appears to be, yeah, more or less pronounceable, and it may have something to do with the idea of magical utterance. So these sequences don't necessarily have to mean something. You can also use them in a more playful manner, in a more twisted manner, because probably this would have also given them power. And this, yeah, could have also been a method of encryption used on the Lindholm amulet sequence, the coded sequence. If read backwards, it almost spells a word here, the word tumnas, which would mean something turned. So perhaps the bone amulet being turned would have also been referred to in the runic inscription, suggesting the shape of the object, in this sense being in harmony with the object. We have some interesting cylinders, also golden cylinders found near Faxe in Denmark again, and this would be what is written on them, this word Froslau. It's not really that obvious, but the first two letters of this text are the first and last letters of the Futhark row, some similar to the alpha and omega in Greek, and similar letter pairings were also employed in ancient times to signify mystical concepts such as the signs of the zodiac and so on and so forth. Although they could have also have their origin merely in spelling lessons. Yeah, with the passage of time, these expressions tend to be more complex. So if we look, for example, at this beautiful object from the island of Sheeland in Denmark, again, from the 5th or 6th century, here we actually have a phrase, and it reads, so Hariuha haitika farawisa ibu auya. I am called Hariuha. I am wise about the danger and I give luck. So this probably refers to the object itself and the potential power the object can endow his master with. Yeah, there are even more complex ones, such as this one from the Kyrko amulet. This was in Sweden, and it translates as wrought runes on foreign corn, did I held for Kunimund. It's a bit weird here, the appearance of the inflected man's name. So for Kunimund, along with what might be a description of another man's name, the warrior held. And it seems to be a little aberrant in light of how names usually appear on these pendants. It has been suggested that the text is poetic, and that the foreign corn actually refers to the gold of the pendant, which was indeed a rare metal for the North until Roman money diplomacy began. So yeah, you could interpret it in that key. Someone conceiving this inscription for someone else. But then again, we also have the term runos here, which yeah, for the runes, and this is in harmony with another pendant we can find in Nebenstedt in Germany, which bears an oddly formed legend that also seems to feature this term. So Gliaug, I consecrate runes, and then again we have this term leak. So probably the term, or possibly the term runos, would have been a replacement for an item description, such as a pendant. However, other legends suggest that such an inscription would have been a poetic development of just a marker signature, a maker signature, sorry, in the sense that I, and then you say your name, made these runes, and then the third element of the Nebenstedt text would be just a reduction of such an expression. So I suppose that the rune carvers would have toyed with such more poetic formulae themselves. All right. Another interesting object was found in the Netherlands, in Bernsteboren, and it was written on three undecorated sections of the body of a staff. And the inscription reads that from wood you turn to the. And the way the inscription is formed reminds us of other inscriptions where the body of the inscription is flanked by the man's name. So this could be a variation of yeah, a way to combine the narrative inscription with name, the five element pattern. A more difficult one is from Ödemotland from Norway. It's physically similar. It also has this crescent form, and it bears quite a perplexing a sequence of runes and symbols. And it definitely would have meant something to the carver, I assume, but for us, it's only relevant that we can identify Buginu, which seems to be a name. And then again, we also always need to take into account that perhaps these carvers had codes of their own, some kind of meanings that they developed themselves, and they would have been intelligible to a smaller community of people or only to themselves. So yeah, there is no way of knowing for sure what these would have meant. So to conclude the part on the enabling runic inscriptions, the basic function of these inscriptions would have been blessing or consecration, I would say. And the relationships between different communities and people seems to be very relevant here as well, because such types of formulae seem to have had the origins in the regions where the runes have their origins themselves. So in the north, and especially in the northeast of Italy, it is a region where we have a lot of Etruscan inscriptions, and some of these inscriptions even carry the name of Alu. And even more interestingly, it was a region where we have archaeologically attested the worship of a form of the goddess Artemis Ortia, and she would have been quite the patron of the words, if you want to put it like that. So Artemis, the one with the words, if you want to translate it like that. And we have inscribed votive inscriptions having been found here in this region. So if she was indeed worshipped as the goddess of writing in this region, it would definitely make even more sense that the origin of the runes is to be found here as well as inspiration for this type of charms and spells in the Germanic world. I'm a little pressed with time here, so I'm going to use the last 15 minutes to show you a couple of healing spells. This time, I've chosen to focus a lot on the enabling spells in this presentation. So now I'm going to show you some of the healing spells, and perhaps in a future presentation, I can also show you some inscriptions having to do with fertility and other functions. So again, we have this Ribe cranium we talked about before, invoking a triad of gods to help against a stroke provoked by some kind of dwarf. And most examples of such finds are Scandinavian, although we do have evidence in Old English as well, and they have to do with this medieval art of healing. For which we also have the term leech craft. So it was a common assumption in the Middle Ages that sickness was due to the intervention of evil spirits, and that the evil spirits were thought to have entered your body through a particular orifice, or through by means of a dart of poison or something of the sort. And we have from the Old English speaking world, we do have um, some books with a lot of similar charms and rituals, like the ones in the Scandinavian world, in Lackmanga, for example, and they're also inspired from Greco-Roman medical law, as well as from the English Irish Christianity. So a lot of cultural contacts here, and Scandinavian charms also represented a synthesis of classical, ancestral, and pagan law. Yeah, let's look at a couple of examples besides the one in Ribe. We have one from Sigtuna in Sweden. It was perforated, so it could have been worn somehow, attached to some part of the body, and it addresses the sickness demon as the wolf, a term applied to people outside of society, generally speaking. It also seems to have some kind of pagan connotation, because wolves were pretty common in Norse mythology as well. So it essentially states, ogre of the wound fever, lord of the ogres, flee now, because you are found. Have for yourself 3 pangs, wolf. Have yourself 9 needs, wolf. And these ice runes may grant that you be satisfied, you wolf. Make good use of the healing charm. So, in this amulet, the spirit responsible for this is cursed with 3 pangs and 9 needs, a tribulation of some kind. It's also a pretty common formula in this kind of charms, and you're going to find healing sticks as well against all kinds of creatures, elves and trolls and ogres, thursir. And in Old English poetry, in Beowulf, for example, Grendel is also described as a thyrse. So this would seem to imply an evil monster in general. In Scandinavian folklore, at least in Old Norse mythology, the categories, so the differences between these types of monsters were not really that obvious. But at any rate, the disease is described as some kind of monster, and the inscription charges the disease, this monster, tormenting the sick person to leave. And we also find parallels in spells in a Canterbury manuscript, for example, where we have a mention of somebody called Giril, the wound causer, and this was against blood vessel pus. The expression, I see 3 ogres and 9 needs, can also be compared to other inscriptions. For example, we do have a curse stick from Bergen with a similar invocation. And we also have a reference in the Eddic poem for Skirnis, where, essentially the servant of the god Freyr threatens the giantess the god is courting with some kind of curse. Like, he says he's going to carve for her 3 staves of evil and a thurs, an ogre, or something like that. Um, Yeah, and we also have a reference in the second Sigtuna amulet, as well as on some other sticks, and the expression can be found in the sense of wolfish evil as well, or hatefulness. This is something you're going to find on the stick from Bergen, for example. And other sticks, yeah, you can also find in Lötose in Sweden. So this suggests that it would have been quite the common belief in to carve such runes in order to cast away some kind of demon. It's uh, pretty clear, quite clear, what we can find on the second Sigtuna amulet, which reads, "Rise and go away beneath the benevolent stars and make this confused mist, destroy this sunshine." Bit unclear here. "I see 3 ogres and 9 needs. I conjure the overseer of the sanctuary." So such invocations would have been quite common. Ideographic ones as well on this stick below in Lötösum. You can actually find the name Naud, Need, and Thurs if you look for the letters in this longer inscription, because um, uh, cut inside the eth runes are actually monograms of N and O, and this would suggest that the inscription consists of a very complicated um, um, sequence of words designating these monsters, as well as the needs that need to go away. Kind of pagan exorcism is also retrieved from Ribe in the 1300s. Again, with some Christian interpolations, this is also something you're going to find very often, a mix-up of Christian and pagan beliefs and formulae. And this is also kind of cryptic, because it begins with an invocation to uh, the earth and to the high heavens, the Son and Holy Mary, and the Lord God Himself, that He grant me leech hands. So he wants to be a powerful medicine man, in other words, and a healing tongue. So he also perhaps wants to be able to enchant or to say a prayer, or both, to heal the trembler when a cure is needed. And then it goes on with mentioning the parts of the body, from back and from breast, from body and from limb, from eyes and from ears, from wherever evil can enter. A stone is called Svart, by the name of Svart. It stands out in the sea. There lie upon it 9 needs, who should neither sleep sweet nor wake warm, until you pray this cure, which I have proclaimed in runic words. Amen. So you can see here we really have a mix up of different Norse concepts. This idea of high heaven is not necessarily a Christian one in itself, because this also occurs not only in Anglo-Saxon texts with a pagan context, but it also occurs in a poem such as the Voluspor, where it is mentioned that earth shall be riven and high heaven, presumably evoking the final battle of Ragnarok. Yeah, it's a runic charm that makes reference to further ancient tropes, yeah, like the healing with hands, and then healing with words, or healing with the tongue, metaphorically speaking, and then um, all these elements seem to represent pre-Christian rhetorical traditions. So, in the sense that you're essentially mentioning all the body parts that need need redemption or healing, and this you can also relate to Anglo-Saxon charms, for example, against elves, and also against worms that you can find in the German-speaking space. And this charm, for example, is pretty similar in the sense that it says something like "Go out, worm, with 9 little ones, out from the marrow of the bone, from bone to flesh, from flesh to skin, from skin to the arrow." So the way I see it, like, you also have this kind of magical stone, and the stone is supposedly meant to capture all the pain and all the torment, and then you cast the stone somewhere far away. It's going to the pain is going to leave you, and it is going to be somewhere it cannot affect you anymore. Yeah, these are protective prayers known as the Nordic, naming various parts of the body. They're not only known from pagan context; they're also known from Christian liturgical manuscripts, and they have been charms to. They have been claimed originally to have been charms to counter classical binding curses, and they continue to be very popular in Germanic leech craft. You can also find them in later sources, such as the Book of Magic from Iceland, known as the Galdrabók, and later Scandinavian inscriptions. And we can also recall here the idea of the 9 needs, in the sense of Odin's connection with 9 twigs in the 9 herbs charm for snake bite from the Laknunga, where a similar allusion is made to a herb which grew on stone. So yeah, pretty interesting here to see how all these elements combine. And I have a couple of examples more. Yeah, so this belief in malignant spirits of disease was quite common at the time, and to protect themselves, Scandinavians would carve runic charms to ward off these beings. And you can find 2 further examples. For example, here in in a Norwegian text from the 13th century, you also find an example with a stone that is heated. Imi heated the stone, and never shall the smoke, and never shall the cooking be cooked. Out heat, Imi heated the stone. So this appears to be a curse as well. And then we also have the amulet from Högstena in Sweden, which was also thought to ward off some insidious beings. This is a very interesting amulet because it was first believed to have been composed to ward off a revenant, or to prevent somebody dead from from rising from the dead. And there has been a new interpretation. So the older interpretation would have been, I incant against the spirit, against the sitting one, against the signing one, against the traveling one, against the flying one, I shall completely wither and die. So since the amulet was found in a grave, it has been suggested initially that this was a revenant spirit. But then again, there is another interpretation. So besides the idea of, if you go in the grave, you should stay in the grave, and the idea that the community should be protected in front of such revenants. But the new interpretation would tend to indicate a rite of some sort, through the enchanting one, through the one destined for the gallows, through the killing ones, through the offering ones, through the ones performing magic, through the flying ones, through the traveling ones. So perhaps the meaning here would be that of a funeral feast. So giving nourishment also with the help of the dead. So you can see how complicated it is sometimes to interpret such. And they continue further on in the Middle Ages. So you're going to find all kinds of mixtures between runes, like medieval runes, and then you have a Latin text actually hidden there, with what seems to be like a prayer, a prayer of some kind. And such texts are are found in different manuscripts, including the Galtra book. And this would have been, for example, or is thought to have been a formula against malaria, or some sort of other diseases. And exorcisms were common at the time, so writing them in runes perhaps would have given them even more power. We also have some rhyming formulae from the same period, so from the medieval period, something like the abracadabra, which again is something you are going to find even written in runes. And there is also this interesting habit of writing it. So first you write the longer word, and then it becomes shorter, and then it becomes even shorter, and so on and so forth. And the assumption is that by doing that, you actually cause the disease or whatever torment it is to disappear. So gradually disappear. And again, you also have a couple of other rhyming formulas, ways such as Anna Christiana Pisti and even Hocus Pocus, you can find. So yeah, actually very very serious formulae which have then been adapted to rhyme in such exorcism, in magical formulations. So the significance of this one here, God incordar incordar, this seems to have something to do with a term used for binding, although I'm not really that sure about that. However, yeah, generally speaking, such expressions are corruptions of well-known Latin liturgical phrases. And I am going to end the presentation with something that is a little more pagan than the ones I discussed previously, which seem to be a little more Christian. So the codified sequences, like the rhyming thistle mistletoe formula, which occurs in various forms throughout Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Iceland, and it occurs in this cryptic sequence. You can also find it on two runestones from the Viking Age, so the Ledberg runestone and the Görlev runestone. And here you can find this magical formulae. So thistle, mistletoe, and casket. And yeah, it's pretty cryptic, especially on the Ledberg stone from Sweden, because here we also have depicted some scenes which apparently are from the Ragnarok apocalypse. And then we have this very standard memorial text with someone called Bisi who placed a stone in memory of his father Thorgaut. And then we have this cryptic runic sequence. And a version of the same formula is actually found in the saga of Bossi and Heraud, which is a later saga, a legendary saga. But it's also very interesting to see that not everything in the legendary sagas seems to be fantastic. They also have some kind of historical core there. And the purpose of the original charm is not really known, but I suspect it has to do with some kind of herb lore, because mistletoe was very well known in the Central European space. It had a deep meaning in Celtic tradition and in Old Norse mythology. You can also find it in the arrow, for example, that was made to kill the god Balder. And mistletoe was also the only plant who didn't want to swear not to harm Balder, and it ends up, well, at least indirectly, killing this bright god of Norse mythology. So yeah, this is also something you should watch out for. And also more complex rune sticks, such as this one from Tönsberg from the 13th century, where we have a variation of protective formulas. And the conclusion can be compared with the greeting on the Bergen stone story stick I mentioned before with the Odin and Thor. Hail to you and be in good spirits. So here you have a lot of elements, a lot of things are going on in this inscription from the 13th century. So first of all, we have a guy called Eilif, the worthy, who owns this stick, and then he says, we have spoken much between ourselves with the reason that I want to learn runes from it, and I ask you, will you give me one of these to marry? And then these are mistletoe, plowshare, probably tistil, histil, casket, and then a sequence of numbers, as a matter of fact, and then a little bit of gossip because two characters are mentioned who are both lodging together, and then the end formula: hail to you, hail and good fortune to you then. So probably a case of runic cryptography here, which was kind of widespread in medieval Bergen, for example, but also in other places. So this stick starts with a casual statement of ownership, then apparently a proposal of marriage, and then some cryptic runes, and then the expanded mistletoe casket formula, and then a system denoting the numbers from 1 to 20, and then the ending with hailing the gods. So you do have ciphers occurring in runic inscriptions from the earliest to the latest time periods in all kinds of forms. Yeah, so the preliminary conclusion for today would be that we have a traditional Germanic magic mixed with all kinds of Christian rites and prayers, as well as influence from the Greco-Roman tradition. So I would generally define this system of formulae that are found in runic inscriptions denoting magic as being a syncretic one. And as we have seen, they can have a lot of forms, starting with just one name or one word, and moving on. So until the Middle Ages, we have a lot of diversity, and going into the direction of exorcising amulets. So the Christians also have adopted a part of this pagan world, and the pagan world has also been influenced by Christianity. So all in all, with regards to the initial question of whether we can regard runes as magical or not, I would say yes and no. I would say that rather writing in itself should be considered as an act of magic and not runes themselves. So inherently, I don't think they possessed. So from the contextual evidence, from the historical evidence, evolutionary and so on, they don't seem to have inherent powers themselves, but the way you use them in different charms with different functions tend to go into this direction, that they were considered somehow powerful in the sense of a means of communication that could also have been used in this context, because at least at the beginning there were definitely only a couple of people who would have been able to perform this act of writing, which would have made it powerful in itself. And then, of course, you could have also written a lot of charms and spells and whatever kind of messages with them, and use your own system of encoding member or ciphers. Also, the Rook runestone I mentioned before also uses cipher runes, and toy with all kinds of letters in order to express yourself, and in order to invoke the gods, or in order to empower a certain type of object. Well, I hope this was interesting for you, and you could find out a couple of things about the typologies of runic charms. And I'm hoping to continue at some point with introducing to you other functions in runic magic.
Thank you for joining us, everyone, and thank you for your lovely comments. There was a question that we are probably very late to address, but I think you can see it on your screen.
Yeah, there was a question about the length of the of the length of this SASA. Yes, I wrote that down at some point, but I didn't really regard it as relevant information. Yeah, I'll have to look it up and answer later because I don't think I know the answer yet. Yeah, the one found in the Thames River, I think it was meant here. Phew. Um, God, I had so many objects written here. Yeah, no, unfortunately, I didn't write down. I didn't write down how long it was, this object. I can look up and answer later. Yeah, it was more
Thank you,
Americanized
Irina,
and
for sharing
propaganda than
your
they could possibly have
invaluable
had. Yeah. Now, I wanted to briefly comment on something, but either way, it was the problem was that in the past, yeah, I don't know, 50 years, I think it was also this Odinist trend in the States, indeed, which was responsible for making. All kinds of runic symbols look bad, not swastikas. I would say the National Socialist regime was actually the main culprit here in making the swastikas look bad. But with regard to the actual runes, because the swastika is not a rune, with regard to the actual runes, there has been a trend, a growing trend of new age movements and neo-paganism, new heathenism, and even the more radical tendencies of Odinist movements, particularly in the States, which have adopted a very esoteric way of looking at the runes and have yeah um, overshadowed the actual historical meaning of this alphabet, which is why it is very important to us to go back to the actual sources and not to fall for dubious websites we find everywhere nowadays, or people claiming they can perform divination with runes. This is also something that is really problematic for me because I have no idea how to do that. And I don't think Tacitus, who mentioned that in his work in the Germania, knew that either. So, yeah, I would refrain from it altogether.
I think my computer is working late. Can you hear me, Irina?
Yeah,
Yeah. So, thank you for sharing your invaluable expertise with us. Please scan the QR that is on your screen to check out Irina's previous master classes. And this is also a reminder that our summer reading groups are starting from June 11th. So please check out the event page and you can also find Irina's masterclass there. And of course, donate to SASA if you can. Thank you for watching. We will be back again with another masterclass in probably a few weeks. Have a great day or night.
thanks again for watching. All the best.